My name is Jim Ince, and I am the coordinator of Chap. Just a brief intro about that. The Porterville College Cultural and Historical Awareness Program, which we call Chap, was organized in 2002 to enhance students' awareness of important aspects of our society to which they may previously have had little or no exposure. A theme is chosen by Chap members each school year. This year we are continuing the theme of the Anthropocene because we found that to be a very rich subject. And faculty members across campus are encouraged to integrate elements of that theme into their coursework and are encouraged to encourage their students to attend these events. Events such as this with a guest speaker or speakers are offered throughout the year, free and open to the public. Please come have a seat. Now, let's take a moment right now and silence our cell phones, if you have them, please. And after the event, we'll have somebody, or I'll be here to provide proof of attendance tickets by the store here, so feel free. All right, this Chap event is in honor of Constitution Day, and our speaker today, Alexander Reed Krase, is it Krase? Krase. I screwed it up. Alexander Reed Krase, Esquire, will speak on the constitutional responsibilities and opportunities as citizens of the United States. Alexander Reed Krase, Esquire, graduated from Porterville High School in 2000, attended University of California, Santa Cruz for a year, then moved to Switzerland from 2001 to 2005, where he attended the University of Geneva. He returned to UC Santa Cruz in 2005, graduated in 2007 with degrees in literature and politics. He attended the University of Tennessee, Knoxville College of Law from 2007 to 2010. All of these dates we will quiz you on at the end of this. I hope you all remember these, right? Okay. Or you can ask Mr. Krase. So from the Tennessee Knoxville College of Law, he graduated with his JD. He moved back to California and was admitted to practice law on December 1st, 2010. For the last 13 years, he's been a general civil practitioner. His focus is in wills, trusts, probate, trust litigation, property law and litigation, family law, and general litigation regarding contracts, personal injury, and other civil disputes. He's been a partner at Krase, Bailey, Reed Krase, LLP since 2015. It's my honor now to present Alexander Reed Krase. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it too loud and distorted? All right. Yeah, just a little bit more on my background. It's just a better idea of why I'm the one speaking today or who you're listening to. Is a huge amount of my education went into different pieces and components of not just the U.S. Constitution, but also constitutions in Europe. The comparative politics courses at the University of Santa Cruz were incredibly interesting for me as you're comparing all the different places like Germany and France, which we think of as industrialized, but they do things different. And that carried on into law school. Every law student has to take at least a semester on the Constitution. And then on top of that, you can go into different areas of either federal law or, again, comparative constitution. For example, we would compare different Supreme Court rulings and the common law in places like Germany, where they do that, and the UK versus cases here in the United States. As my intro said, I've been practicing for 13 years. The Constitution is something that, for an attorney, it comes up a lot, as you might imagine. And it's usually undertoned. There are some cases that I have, like eminent domain cases. Those are cases where the government is forcing somebody to sell their property to the government, or inverse condemnation cases where somebody claims that the government did something that forced them to lose their land. Those would probably be the only actual constitutional cases that I would see here. But as we get into it, there's different pieces and components. It's the foundation for everything we do. So first thing, I got a call and said, you need to speak at Constitution Day. In my 13 years of Constitution Day, the only thing I knew about it was Alan, who works in my office, had to speak 10 years ago. So the first thing I had to do was look it up. And it's to commemorate the Constitution. And it's actually a federal regulation that if there's any federal funds that are coming to an educational institution, they are supposed to have a program for Constitution Day. So the real reason we're here is money, right? That's not just education. So if you look farther into it, it's actually a law that Congress passed. And so 36 U.S. Code 106, state and local observations, the civil and educational authorities of states, counties, cities, and towns are urged to make plans for the proper observance of Constitution Day and Citizenship Day for the complete instruction of citizens in their responsibilities and opportunities as citizens of the United States and of the state and locality in which they reside. That's pretty broad. And for a 1 hour presentation, probably we're not going to do a complete instruction on all responsibilities and opportunities as citizens. But in looking at that, I thought, okay, if we're here because it's federally required and there's a law that says what we're supposed to be doing, then what are our responsibilities? We think of it's called the Bill of Rights. It's the Constitution. It's rights for us, but it's not really, there's no Bill of Responsibilities that we think of. And so that is what I kind of wanted to focus on today. But before we get into that, just some background information. I don't know how much people have already studied about the Constitution. Do you remember your civics class from high school? Does anyone remember? There's 7 articles of the Constitution, 27 amendments. It is only 7,591 words, which is less than 32 pages double-spaced. Which when you think about it, for a document that's 236 years old, governs 320 million people, it's pretty short. And there's different pieces that I think are important to look at to see how it expanded and where the Constitution may be short, but our society of laws is not. Just as an aside, I think there's close to 300,000 federal laws and regulations that we're all subject to. And that's just federal law. That's not California. California, of course, has its own constitution, and it's actually more like 75,000 words. It's huge. It's like 350 pages if you type it out. And then you have all of your different local government laws that you're subject to. Tulare County has different ordinances that we're all required to follow. And then here we are in Porterville, there's city laws and ordinances we have to follow. And then there's different regulating bodies that overlap and govern our lives. So when you think about it, there's over 500,000 different rules that we in society are subject to every single day. And one of the reasons lawyers exist is because nobody could possibly know every single one of those rules. All you have to do, and that's why I don't even know all of the different criminal laws. I especially stay with the civil stuff. But that's because that's what our society is, and it all comes out of these 7 different articles, and then the Bill of Rights. So Article 1 creates Congress and gives it its legislative power. It's by far the most robust of the articles, in my opinion. Article 2 creates the presidency and gives its executive power. Article 3 creates the U.S. Supreme Court and authorizes Congress to lower federal courts. Article 3, we think of 3 branches of government, is super short. It won't even fill a page, which is always weird to me. Article 4, differentiates between state and federal powers. And then Articles 5, 6, and 7 are sort of your bookkeeping stuff. That was how they got it passed. The original Bill of Rights, of course, there's only 10 of them, which means there's only been 17 actual amendments since everything was ratified for Constitution Day, 1787. So not a lot of changes. And for something that's this old, it is an amazing document in the sense that it's vague. And it's a living document, we call it, in the sense that it allows society to implement it in different ways as time changes. So for today, what are your responsibilities as citizens and what rights come out of that? I'm just going to go over 4 different examples. A little bit on voting. We think of voting as a right, but also it's a responsibility. It's important that when we are participating in society, you don't just get to complain about things. You have to use your voice, use your power at the ballot box, and do something. And we can go into examples of why some people may think that they shouldn't vote. Next, I'm going to talk about serving on juries, just how important that is to our criminal justice system and our legal system. Without juries, I mean, how do you settle disputes? People shoot each other, right? Defending the country and the armed forces. We'll go over how you're required to protect the country if you're a citizen. And then last, not just paying taxes, but then our duty to participate in the civil organizations that our taxes are hopefully being used to support. So the right to vote in the Constitution is Article 1, Section 4. And it says, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for the senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. And so it's only senators and representatives that get elected technically under the Constitution. The Electoral College is supposed to elect the president. I know with current events, a lot of us know a lot more about the Electoral College now than we want to know. So I'm not going into that. It's just focusing on voting. When you read Article 1, Section 4, it says almost nothing. It basically says, we're not going to worry about it. States, you figure it out. And if we think you're doing it wrong, then we'll take action. And for the first 87 years of the country's history, that's exactly what happened. There wasn't any federal regulations as to voting. And then things started changing. Obviously, there was a civil war, so we got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after the war. And the 15th Amendment specifically pertains to voting, and that's no discrimination on account of race. Wasn't for another 50 years that women would get the right to vote, and that was 1920 in the 19th Amendment. And then another 44 years later, they finally said, we're going to ban poll taxes in federal elections, which also there's reasons, there's different laws and different things out there about whether or not you had to own land to be able to vote. And then, the last one, the 26th Amendment during the issues with the Vietnam War, where you could be drafted at 18 and sent to war, but you couldn't vote. Well, we ended up with the 26th Amendment that said, okay, 18-year-olds can vote if we're going to send them off to war. So those are sort of the 4 landmark changes in the Constitution that have to do with voting. And then there's quite a few different federal laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1870 has, for a large part, been replaced. It did not do what it was supposed to do, given all the Jim Crow laws and the different laws that came in afterwards. But there is a really important piece of it that still lives on today. It's called the Section 1983. It's what gives you as citizens the right to basically sue a government official, like for police brutality or those kinds of things. So in law school, I actually had an entire class just on one section of that one Voting Rights Act. Again, gets you back to specialization. The next one, the Voting Acts Right of 1957, signed by Eisenhower, again was an attempt to get rid of discrimination, to enforce the 15th Amendment. It gave the federal government the power to sue for injunctions to force state officials to do what they needed to do. An injunction is basically a court order that says you can or can't do something. And obviously it was complicated, it was ineffective because you're relying on lots of different people to do things that they weren't going to want to do. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 and of 1964, of course, are the landmark Voting Rights Acts, and then of 1965. And those 3 are where most of us think of our reality being today. I put down a case, this Pierce versus Village of Ossining in New York, which we all think of as relatively liberal, especially in the 1960s. It was not very conservative. It wasn't until this case came along in 1968 that they struck down a state law that required people to own land to vote for municipal laws. So 1968, people who were, I mean, we all have family that was alive then. This was still a thing, a requirement to own land, to have the right to vote. I think many of us try to say this was back in the past, or we think of plantations or slaveholders or those kinds of things, not something that is a contemporary change, a new piece of America. Where then there's been, some other laws that have come in afterwards. We have our ADA, then helping people overseas vote, which was very important to me when I lived overseas. And then, of course, the military as well. And then there's the Help America Vote Act, which tries to update it and digitalize and those kinds of things. So the responsibility of voting should not be taken for granted. Alexis de Tocqueville is cited in every single politics class, it seems. He did his Democracy in America is a really great work. But when one examines the Constitution of the United States, one is frightened by the quantity of knowledge and discernment that it supposes in those whom it must rule. In other words, the Constitution is set up with the assumption that people know who they're voting for, they know what they're voting for, and that they take the time and energy to figure it out. And back to why we're here today, your responsibilities as a citizen is to actually educate yourself before you go to vote. And I'm not sure how many people today even read the California ballot measures thing that gets mailed out to you. How many of us look at different news sources, not just the one we go to every day, but actually look into all different types of sources to see the different ways that things could be tilted? It takes work. And I'm not sure how much in America we still do the work or take the time it needs to be responsible citizens. But the Constitution assumes you do, which is why you'll hear from time to time different laws that get passed that are just, you say, what were people thinking? The next one we're going into is your duty for jury duty. The Sixth Amendment has to do with criminal cases, and I've highlighted the fact that there's a right to a speedy trial and an impartial jury. And if you don't have all of your citizens actually showing up for jury duty, actually spending the time to make yourself available, the court system can't move. It's already a slow system. It needs everybody to be there to be able to just get juries for people. And the other part is an impartial jury. Now, when we think about, I don't know, I think that is the one of the toughest pieces of the amendment. The Constitution says the jury is supposed to be impartial, but we all carry around with us different biases. We all grow up with different experiences. Is this something that is, how do you achieve an impartial jury, a truly impartial jury? And oftentimes people will simply say everyone's got to do the best they can to set aside what their different biases are when they go in. And, in my experience, and I'll talk about it with civil cases, we'll get to that. So the Seventh Amendment has to do with jury for some civil matters. It basically said you get a jury, but only if you got a jury under English law in 1791. So it's a very historical concept, but there's nothing that prohibits the states from giving you rights to juries on things. And so it's Article 1, Section 16 of the California Constitution that actually affirms your right to a civil jury trial. But you only need to have, to win on a civil jury trial, you only need to win 9 out of the 12 over. So, and that exists because it's set by law. And there's some things that you don't have a right to a jury for. If you're being evicted, you don't get a jury in California. If you're fighting over child custody or you're fighting for your parental rights, if CPS has come in, you don't have a right to a jury. It's all a judge that does it. There's some other what are traditionally called laws at equity where you're stuck with the judge making the call. And the viewpoint in law is always who's doing the fact finding, and that's usually a jury, and who applies the law, and that's usually the judge. And so usually when you have these verdict forms and different things, it's all set up to see, just answer the questions. Who do you believe and who don't you believe? And then, so do juries work? I have here the oath that if any of you sit on a jury, you'd be required to say before they sit you on the jury, do you and each of you understand and agree that you will well and truly try the cause now pending before this court, and a true verdict render according only to the evidence presented to you and to the instructions of the court? So when this oath is given, I don't know how many, can I get a show of hands? How many people have sat on a jury? Okay. Yeah, so for the video, there's only about 4 people that raise their hands. I personally have never been able to sit on a jury. I've tried many jury cases, and so I've done the voir dire to choose my jurors and decide who's going to be there. For me, the first time when they administered this oath, you could see how seriously everyone took it. I grew up in the age when Simpsons was new, and you have all those different jokes about people sleeping on the jury, and everyone's bored out of their mind and those kinds of things. And in each experience I've had with people, they understand the gravity of what's happening. When I've observed some criminal trials with jury, they understand that you're taking somebody's freedom away. And when you're sitting there, it may be boring, it may be something that you don't want to do, but it matters a lot, and especially to the people involved. And it has always been amazing to me how seriously people have taken it. And then if we think about underneath why we have a jury, it does actually safeguard against tyranny in the sense that it's not a judge that says you're going to prison. It's 12 people that from your community, and partial or impartial, it's at least a safeguard of people who aren't elected to office, that aren't paid to be there, well, $15 a day now, who are there just because they are citizens of this country and want to make the decision. The participation in the process informs people as to what the justice system is all about. There's been a number of juries that you're allowed to poll the jury afterwards, which is ask them questions as to why they voted the way they voted. And some people after cases, you can even have a conversation with it because the case is over. And it's amazing to me how many times I hear, I didn't understand that our system worked that way. I didn't understand that this is how you actually got things done. And it's just participating leaves, back to Tocqueville, to an educated citizenship. And then, as I alluded to earlier, you have peaceful dispute resolution. And we think of this in civil cases especially. How many, I don't know, if your neighbor decides to build a fence 4 feet over the line on your property, without the civil system, what are you going to do? You're going to end up in fighting with that neighbor, or is it going to end in physical altercation? Or how do you resolve those problems? And how do you make sure that it's fair? And so there's a whole system that's there to say, okay, these 12 people were convinced that this is the right answer, and we all agree to live by what our fellow community says is right or wrong. So in that sense, I would say that it works. The third duty that we're going over is defending the nation, serving in the military. So the Constitution itself doesn't say that any citizen has to serve in the military. But it says that Congress has all these powers to declare war and grant letters of marque and reprisal, which privateers, it used to be that we could actually hire mercenaries, and the letters of marque were basically private ships that the government would hire to enforce the laws. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for longer term than 2 years, which something tells me it's been a lot longer than 2 years that most money appropriated to different projects is used, but that's neither here nor there. To provide and maintain a navy, to make rules of government and regulation for land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth militias, and suppress insurrections and invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. And it's our last point here, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or any department or office thereof. So now Article 8 is much longer. I just pulled out the few provisions that have to do with the military. But it's that last provision that has led to laws being passed that can force you to be drafted. And that would be the Civil Service Registration Act, so it's 50 U.S.C. 3800. And basically, I mean, is there any man here over 18 that hasn't registered for the Selective Service? Not yet? Okay. There are legal punishments for not registering. I think one of them is you can't become president. But there's other things. All of us are compelled between 18 and 26, if we're men, to register with the Selective Service and provide all of this extremely personal identifying information to the government to be in their system forever. And it was found constitutional in this United States Supreme Court case from 1985. Few interests can be more compelling than a nation's need to ensure its own security. So Congress has decided that it has the power under the Constitution to draft people. And as a result of the Constitution, we all, at least men, have a duty to serve in the military if we're called upon. And it's one of those, it's been so long since the draft has been implemented that most of us have almost forgotten that that's out there. And in making this, I realized the last time I thought about it was 2001 and 2003. 2001 was when China shot down a U.S. spy plane that wasn't where it was supposed to be. And there's about a week where they were thinking of war, and I was thinking, great, am I going to get drafted? I just turned 18 and just registered. And then in 2003, of course, the Iraq War broke out, and I didn't know how that was going to go. And since then, I have not thought about it, and now I'm 40, so I'm free, right? Citizen's duty maybe doesn't apply to me, or maybe it will. But what about the Fifth Amendment? The Fifth Amendment is the constitutional basis for many of the anti-sex discrimination laws. And we just saw that code only applies to men. The 1981 case said that there can't be any discrimination in the law because women under the military rules weren't allowed to serve in combat. So it would be pointless to have a draft when there wouldn't be a military job for them to hold, and that was the reasoning then. In a recent 16 case that was declined to be picked up in 2021 by the Supreme Court, they said we're not going to, the ACLU had like a 180-page brief that they put in about how it's sex discrimination, how it's wrong, and how it needs to change. And the Supreme Court still did not want to take it up because they said it's pointless now. In 2020, the Military Commission recommended the inclusion of women in the Selective Service, and so the courts are going to leave it up to Congress to change it as the military sees fit, and they didn't want to get involved. And so that's where we stand now. The law is constitutional, and it only applies to men. Taxes and participation in civic institutions. So back to, this is another couple sections from Article 1, Section 8, which is basically a laundry list of powers. And it's the part that says Congress can lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and exercises to pay debts and provide for the common defense. And I still spell it the British way. And general welfare of the United States. And all duties, imposts, and exercises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So you can't tax one state more than another. But interestingly, you couldn't tax income, right? All those things have to do with commerce. And originally under the Constitution, the government was just sitting there making sure that commerce was fair. You're right at the start of the Industrial Revolution. The free markets are a new thing. Laissez-faire, and Adam Smith and all that. And so that's where their minds were thinking of the founders at that time. It wasn't until the 16th Amendment came around in the early 1900s that finally income taxes were implemented. And for most of us, that's probably what people talk about the most, though it might not be where we pay the most in taxes or where we are touched on them the most. If you own a home, you have your property taxes. There's lots of different, anytime you buy anything at a store, you have your different taxes there too. So why is that a duty? Because the federal government took those three provisions, so that's like 2 paragraphs in Article 1, Section 8, and 1 amendment, and has created nearly 10,000 laws. There's like 9,800 and something sections in the IRS code. Those are laws that Congress actually enacted to say when you have to pay taxes and when you don't. The Internal Revenue Code then takes those laws and implements regulations and says, this is how we're actually going to put this law into practice. And so there's over 10,000 regulations that you have to follow. And you can see that if you try to defeat taxes and are convicted of it, you can go to jail for up to 5 years and have to be fined up to $100,000, plus you owe your back taxes, plus the cost of prosecution. So it's definitely not a right, it's a duty as a citizen. You are stuck with this very robust responsibility to fund the government under the Constitution. And with that, you should be thinking, well, where are your tax dollars going then? So I got this from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. It's a nonprofit. Other sources will have different percentages and breakdowns, and this is from 2022. And you can see that, defense, Social Security, health insurance, economic security, benefits for veterans, and interest on debt. So a huge majority go through just those 6 things. And, defense, we know where that is in the Constitution and the responsibilities we have there. Social Security and health insurance are just based out of Commerce powers as well as the economic security programs. So all of that is just Congress saying that this is what we think we need as Americans. And veterans benefits has to do with defense, raising and taking care of your army. And then you have all these little pieces that are broken down. Interestingly, when you think about your debt, you can see that 7 cents on every dollar just goes to interest now, which at what point are we losing our ability to exercise our rights and responsibilities under the Constitution when the money that we're paying is not going to help our society? So all of those, when people hear that you have 10,000 different IRS laws, when you have 10,000 regulations or more, and all this responsibility to pay, and you see where your money is going, then the next thought should be, I have a duty, I have a responsibility to participate. Because if I don't like where the money is going, then it's my job under the Constitution to say something, to participate in it, and to make the change that I want. And so First Amendment, obviously you can peacefully assemble, and you can also petition the government to redress grievances, which if you think the government is doing something that they don't have the right to do, the First Amendment says you're welcome to take it to the courts. And then there's open meeting laws for publicly officials. For federal laws, that's the Bagley-Keene Act, and for California, it's the Brown Act. Our government doesn't work in back rooms like we often think it does. For the most part, it operates in open meetings that anyone from the public could come and visit and see, and no one from the public is there. The Porterville City Council meetings are probably one of the more well-attended meetings by the public. On the times I've gone, sometimes you've seen 20, 30 people there. Usually it's not that many. For different institutions, like we have a public hospital district, I'm there as counsel for the board, and it is subject to the Brown Act, open meetings. We sometimes get one person from the public during an election cycle to see what's there. So how health dollars are spent, hospitals run, all those things which you could have a voice in, which you can participate in, nobody's there. And we go through all those different pieces. You're paying into the system, but are you doing the work to make the system what you want? And I think that's part of where we get back to Constitution Day, that we as citizens need to know what are our rights and responsibilities, and we need to understand that we have a duty under this document to be active, not passive, in how we interact with government. So with that, I'm sorry, I'm told by court reporters that I talk way too fast. That only took 30 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? And it doesn't have to be on my topics. It can be on any general questions that you would like to bring up.
The mic, so if somebody wants to speak up.
Okay. Yes.
Congress doesn't extend our debt ceiling. Is it that 7%?
No, so we can go back to that graph. So Congress is set up right where they have the power under the Constitution to make a budget. They have the power to allocate the money to different programs that are passed into law. And the problem that we've had for years is that Congress says, well, we can't go above this amount of debt, but they keep passing laws that incur more bills. And so you have some laws that say that the government is required to spend X amount of dollars on this program, like the one that was up right now that didn't pass, which was amazing, was the defense spending. They've already entered into contracts with different military, providers. The military is required to honor those contracts because they've said they're going to spend that money, but they can only pay if Congress actually approves getting them the money. And so, I guess to answer your question, what happens is think of somebody who's late on their credit card payments. What does the credit card company do? Raises your interest, sends out penalties, and a larger amount of our tax dollars then get used to cover those expenses of administration instead of having the money go to things that we want as a country. And it's such a political football that everybody knows the fix is simple. Congress should not be allowed to pass a new law unless there's a budget assessment that says the money's there to actually do it. I mean, if that were the policy, there's some states that have that, like Kansas. You wouldn't be running into this. But that's not what people in our government want to do. And that's, I guess, unless we're more active in our civic institutions saying that we want that change to come about, it probably won't happen because there's a lot that can be gained in our system by pointing the finger at the other side.
I'm saying, Alex, you said that in your practice of civil, in constitutionalism, you only dealt with adverse possession and condemnation, correct?
In direct legal cases. So I don't do any of your 1983 suits where police brutality or any of that. You want a specialist who does it. Government immunity is extremely complicated and filled with traps. And so if you do it all the time, yeah, go ahead.
But you have done some adverse possession and condemnation.
In the last 5 years, there's always been at least one case that deals with adverse possession or inverse condemnation. Inverse condemnation we see a lot more because we have a bunch of public water districts, which are public entities. And what happens when they have a pipe burst and then don't want to fix it? Well, they're using your land now as lake for them. You're now water storage for them. So you bring an action against them. Or what happens when, we're building all these roundabouts. What happens when Caltrans wants to expand to the highway? They've got to take your land to be able to build that project. And in the Constitution, I didn't cite it here, but the government has the right to take your land. It's just they have to give you just compensation. So the lawsuit typically in eminent domain is the government has their appraiser, you have your appraiser, and you fight over the numbers until you get to an agreement. Inverse condemnation is harder because you have to prove that it was actually taken.
Or devalued by their act.
Correct.
So in your experience, have you always been the legal counsel for the public, or have you ever worked for the government?
No, I've always been a private attorney, so always dealing with landowners and people who were having their property taken. It did come close with CRV once. where there was a need for a medical offices building, and it didn't go that way, which was good. But for the most part, usually the government has in-house counsel. Like Caltrans has one attorney that, actually there's more than one attorney in that office. All he does is eminent domain cases for Caltrans as they're expanding the roads throughout the state.
So you find yourself more sympathetic to the public in these cases, or more sympathetic to the
So when you're dealing with Caltrans, it's big government, right? So it's easy to say, I'm helping the little guy. I'm helping somebody who's having the government come and take them down. When you're dealing with water districts, it's a lot more complicated because water districts typically don't have that many people. If you win a suit against them, everybody's water bill goes up. And so you're balancing neighbors' interests. And so sometimes you get concerned how the Constitution it can be used for the benefit of one over the benefit of all.
What do you think is the main reason? You mentioned the main reason for lack of participation. You mentioned the Brown Act in California.
Yeah.
What do you think? New generation.
That's a great question, and I'll give the example of when I was president of the Springville Chamber of Commerce. Springville up the road is a unincorporated area. The only reason it's Springville is because the government says in their census that is Springville. There's no government or no anything, and there would be people who would call up the Chamber of Commerce and complain to us about the sidewalks, about all the different things that are happening. Why are those streetlights going out? And there seemed to be a real lack of just understanding of who was actually in charge. If you're angry at the sidewalks, you probably should be talking to Caltrans. If you're angry about the park, you probably need to be talking to the county. If you don't like, how the sirens are going at the Forest Service office that they have there, you got to talk to the state. And I think there's a bit of a sense that it's so complex and so big that where do you start? And so people find it easier just to not try and just complain that this is this. I think that is one of the reasons why jury duty is so good is people don't really have a choice. And when they do it, I think everyone's better for it. Can I get a show of hands? Has anyone been to one of the county board of supervisors meetings? Yeah, so we got maybe 3 or 4.
So your answer would be the lack of understanding and complication.
Yeah, so a lack of understanding, and then I would say it would be a overwhelmed or overburdened sense given all the different institutions. And we live in Tulare County. Each one of us drives on county roads. Each one of us has probably dealt or knows somebody who's dealt with the county sheriff. During COVID, I mean, the county is the one that implemented a bunch of regulations as to masks and different things in spaces, but none of us go to their meetings. And I think part of that is, do we want to drive to Visalia for this? Are we taking our time, our money, our effort? We're busy. And then there's maybe a feeling of not being able to make that change. And I think if you talk to your representative, if you go, you'll find that it actually is a lot easier to influence especially the local government than most people think. Did I answer it? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And again, that's just my opinion. I think 1 million people have written dissertations on the lack of Americans' participation in civic structures, and it's declined. It's gone down. Any other questions?
I'm waiting for the mic, not for this group, but for the recording. So we had in this room on Thursday the meeting of the Kern Community College District Board of Trustees. They meet here in our campus once a year. I sat through a lot of that. And I've sat through their meetings a lot over the years because of offices I've held. One of the things that I find fascinating is the way we structure meetings, city council, county board of supervisors, board of trustees. We structure them following very rigid forms of order based on Robert's Rules of Order that make it really hard for ordinary people to follow what in the world's going on anyway. Do you think that's part of the barrier, or is that something people ought to be able to learn?
Well, I'll let you know that the hospital meetings are not dry at all. And a 2-hour presentation on seismic compliance is just, what everyone wants to sit through and listen about. So part of that's the structure of the Brown Act. One of the toughest things for elected officials when I've been in meetings I've been counsel is you'll have a member of the public who will come up and will give this 3 or 5 minute presentation and make an excellent point. Excellent. And it's a new issue that's not on the agenda, but something that really should be addressed. And under the Brown Act, all the elected officials can do is suggest that it be put on the agenda for the next meeting. So there's the member of the public is there, and the public officials can't even talk to them about what they are trying to bring forward. And that would, to address your problem, to get more public participation, would require an amendment of the Brown Act to do that. And the fear of the legislature and people has always been, well, then it becomes a catch-all. If you would never have anything on the agenda that was controversial, right? You would just have some member of the public that happens to bring it up at the meeting. And so there's a lot of work that needs to go into understanding how those meetings run. And I think for most people, you're right, you're overwhelmed and you're busy. And so as legal counsel, it took me 2 years to feel comfortable with the Brown Act, where I'm not looking up every single question. And still, if there's anything serious, I'm going to look it up. It's just, and that's part of our society, right? Everything is so regimented. There's so many laws that unless you put the time and energy into becoming a specialist, it's easier to not do anything and then complain when things don't go how we want them to go.
Kind of to follow up on the gentleman's statement, I think he's talking at Robert's Rules of Order, you're talking Brown Act. And Robert's Rules of Order is just an informal book that a lot of institutions use to try to streamline regiment the process. But what happens, whereas Brown Act is actually state law, and there's certain I think the intent of Robert's Rules of Order was good at first to make meetings smoother, but it becomes weaponized. I sat on the council where I had an authority on Robert's Rule, and every time you would say it was point of order. And what's interesting in our charter, which is our constitution for Porterville, it says that we generally use Robert's Rules of Order as a thing, but we're not constrained to it. And I love it. If you ever read Robert's Rules of Order, the very first sentence is, nothing in this book should be construed to impede the speech of anybody. It's ironic because it does get manipulated. Everything is manipulated nowadays. And as you say, you don't follow Robert's Rule of Order at the board meetings anyway, right?
We do. It's part of the bylaws for the hospital.
You have to?
Well, not that you have to, but that they are supposed to do their best to conform to the Robert's Rules of Orders, which is why we have our different, motions in a second, and we go through all those different procedures. But it gets written into a lot of our public institutions.
And with the Brown Act, and I'll stop talking. With the Brown Act, though, there are certain things you cannot do, right? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So as I alluded to with the members of the public, one of the things that drives new public officials bonkers is unless it's on the agenda, you can't talk about it. And not only can you not talk about it, you can't have a side conversation before the meeting to see how other public officials are thinking about it. You can't discuss it unless it's on the agenda and it's brought up during the meeting. And I think it has a really good purpose. It stops there from being a lot of backroom deals, because if you can prove that somebody did that, then they are liable. It doesn't even matter. What a good example was, I forget where it was up north in Santa Cruz County. There was a city council were texting each other during a meeting and complaining about one of the other council members. And because there's 3 of them included in those texts during the meeting that weren't open to the public, they ended up getting sued. There was clear proof that they had violated the Brown Act, and the city ended up, or the government agency ended up settling out for $50,000 just because of a few text messages. And so, yeah, I guess there's that balance of, is that good because we're stopping these side conversations, everything's public, you get to participate in it, and you get to be part of your civic institutions, or is it being taken overboard and manipulated to stop people from participating? I don't know. I think both are right. Yeah.
How would you amend the Brown Act with all this being said?
That's a good question. I think I would change some of the enforcement mechanisms that I think you need to have more of an opportunity under the Brown Act as public officials to correct it. So like your cell phone example, what should have happened is they should have had an opportunity to hold another meeting, to have it be noticed so everyone can come and complain and discuss the issue. They can say what they were talking about, and then they've corrected the problem. I mean, I have no problem with it, striking down deals that are made that weren't open to the public. That needs to stay. But using it to stop people from talking seems like the opposite of what we want in our government. So, but it's hard to do.
Maybe one more question?
I guess since this is a group of students, something I'd like to ask, I guess, or have us swing back to is, if you noticed on the prior slide, it says federal funding of education is 3%. And as we can see, that's a very small amount of the entire federal budget. And I think what I'm hearing from some of the students is, how can we become empowered? How can we break into this system? And I guess my comment and then my question is, one of the central elements, I think, of presentation is, it's not they, it's we. There is no they. This is all we. So I guess the thing that would be, I guess we could talk about a little bit, is how to engender more of that we feeling. That's.
Yeah, I'm always amazed that the voter turnout for your local elections is the lowest. I mean, that's the place where you have the most of an impact. For a lot of it, like the number of votes for our different supervisors, board of supervisors, it's under 10,000 for each one of them. It is not many people that's saying who's running this county. And if we were to be, I think, more active on the local stuff, the little things, you'd get more clear how government works. And 2, you would have those tangible results right away. You're not hoping Congress is someday going to enact this amendment. You're not going after term limits for people, that are big changes for the whole country. You can You go to a city council meeting and say, we need a crosswalk. And you can get it sometimes. If you say that this is a dangerous place, and they'll do their assessments, and you'll see that there's flashing lights that pop up at different places, and it seems little, and maybe people don't want to spend their time on it, but I think that would be the number one thing is there's lots of little organizations around us and entities, and that's where you'd want to start participating. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.